Hey Ben, it's lovely to see you. Hello, Alex. As always, great to see you again. You're going to be sick of the sight of me this week. Okay, so we have a few people just joining. I'm just going to respect the fact that we've got people who've arrived on time, Karen. And if it's okay, let's uh, let's get cracking. So very good day, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to wherever you're joining us from. I think I know most of you. Sarah Schwab is my name, founder and CEO of the Experience Accelerator. And it's my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Karen Walch today. I cannot say enough good things about this lovely woman that we have with us today. She really does represent, I think, a role model for me in many, many ways. Um, she earned her PhD in political science, and she's really focused a big chunk of her career on this topic of power, both in her coaching, in her writing. By the way, she's an award-winning author. More on that later, Karen, I'm sure. And her expertise really lies in the field of negotiation. She's a coach, as I mentioned, she's a faculty and a prolific author. And most recently, she has launched something very fun and exciting called the Social Intelligence Lab. And the Social Intelligence Lab is really a community of practice. And I think this is a point of commonality for us, Karen, right? In terms of we care a lot about good behaviors that drive business impact. And the Social Intelligence Lab is a community of practice to help people do just that. And so I think we say practice makes progress, Karen, as opposed to practice makes perfect. But there's certainly some very, very exciting things that Karen has upcoming for us to enjoy and get better at. Behaviors that influence and drive business impact. Because, Karen, I think you and I would agree that sometimes we have the very best intentions to collaborate, but we don't necessarily end up with the results that we want. And we've talked a lot about the role of power in that. And you've sometimes told me over the years that you've got a bit of a problem with power. Do you want to say some more about that?
Yes, I do. And I think I've talked to many of you. Thank you, everybody, for being here about my interest in power. And today I'm going to actually start at the beginning. And it took me 10 years to finish my undergrad. I was working part-time in a law firm. And then I had this opportunity to work in Roatan, Honduras. I don't know how many of you are scuba divers, but the reef in Honduras is beautiful. So I moved there and I was a manager for the kitchen and the dining room, the housekeeping and the office. And the resort was a partnership between a Honduran and another dive master from Bonaire and his wife, Alice from Miami. So one story that comes to mind that reminds me why I started with this interest is I was in the dining room, beautiful open air dining room with lots of hibiscus and bamboo and flowers around us and looking out at the reef, turquoise reef. And it was a really nice setting and I was feeling really good about my waiters. And the waiters, six of us sat around the table and Alice started being very directive and instructive. I'm used to that in terms of people who own businesses can be very direct, but her tone became actually more disrespectful and I thought very curt. And at one point she said, pointing to all the hibiscus and bamboo plants surrounding us on the patio, she said, "You boys need to pick up some of these hibiscus and bamboo stalks and make flower pieces for the tables." So there was just a minute of silence and my mind started racing. First of all, I didn't know how to address her because we do this all the time anyway. And then abruptly, Heston, one of our waiters who had a lot of experience with cruise ships, pushed away from the table very, very quickly. And he said, "Ma'am, you do not call us boys. We are grown men and we have families and we just make our living at this resort." And like a lightning bolt, I realized how little I understood my own power. I was so embarrassed that even though I did have the structural authority to advocate for my employees, I didn't. And I didn't advocate for myself. And I just felt very powerless. And it was such a miserable feeling. And then at the same time, if you think about the context that we were in, the civil wars were raging in Central America. And I was upset about how ineffective US foreign policy was and all the costly consequences. And once again, I felt powerless as an American to support my own company about foreign policy. And I really
Mhm.
believed that it was too destructive. And I loved this region, and I really wanted to understand why are some of us powerless and others aren't.
Mhm. So it sounds like, Karen, there was a bit of a moment for you personally, but also against a backdrop of, in the very field that you were studying, political waves, of which I think we're probably experiencing a few of those currently as well. So what did you do? Like, you've got these sort of big things that have come to you. You're an intelligent woman. You recognize you weren't managing power. What did you do?
Well, my undergrad was in social change and development. And through that, I learned a lot about power and change to norms and to values and to institutions. So I went through a catalog and wanted to understand where could I study power?
Hmm.
And it landed right on political science. So I went into the study of power and to really understand why some groups have powers and others don't. So the first lessons you get in political science come basically down to Machiavelli strategies, or in our language today, it would be more domination, more
Hmm.
coercion practices. And it's really about gaining power over another. And the ends justify the means, because if we don't think about our own peace and security, who will? Who's going to protect us? So
Hmm.
we have to have the power, the means, the strategies, and the tactics to really make somebody do something they would not do for our own self-interest. This is
And
the
I'm just going to
fundamental. Go ahead.
hop in real quick, Karen. Just give us the 2-minute run on Machiavellian strategies, just so that folks who are watching the recording are super clear.
If any of you really love philosophy, there's a very old story of the prince who is imprisoned, and this is from Italian politics and all of the fighting and coercion of building your own empire, your own tribe, your own entity. And the trick was to learn as much about your counterpart to undermine them, destroy them, coerce them, and manipulate them to win above all. And then as time went on in political science, the roots of realism, it's called realpolitik, basically is that foundation that all of international relations is built on the function where we must manipulate, coerce, and win relative. This is an important point, relative to others, because the world is a zero-sum game. If I don't win, then I have lost. It's
Mhm.
a simple zero-sum game.
Mhm.
And it's don't let others win, because then you lose. It's an inverse relationship. If others win, I lose. And
Mhm.
that's just not the appropriate thing for a leader to do when you're in charge of the security, the peace and security for your own nation or your own people or your own organization.
Mm. I didn't want to take the spotlight off you, but that was really helpful clarification. But let's go back to you. So,
So much
so
to
you,
talk about, Sarah.
my favorite subject. So what did you understand as you sort of came to realize, the zero-sum game was the dominant, to coin a phrase, um, approach towards power? How did you kind of unpack that?
Well, I started to discover that there's something wrong with this particular philosophy, this theory, this kind of behavior. And I also felt like I was wrong pursuing this as a track, learning all the strategies and tactics of realpolitik, and why that's so critical and functional. It just didn't help me with my goal of wanting to do better and to gain more prosperity and satisfaction. And I was also interested in potentially teaching or going into the foreign service. I didn't see how this was going to help us advocate for others. So this realist historical political examples always seem to miss the fact that there's a lot of social change movements and a lot of rights protections that were forged by people who had little structural authority. They didn't have access to the resources. And people who went into change, to become a change agent, to wanting to bring positivity, bring resources to others, and to create new institutions and laws, I saw that they used a different kind of power, and I wasn't exactly sure what that was. So I believe that if I just kept working hard and I passed all the exam and I'm going into completing a PhD in the deepest way I can around power, it was completely unsatisfying and it just seemed wrong-headed. So that's why it took me 10 years to finish my graduate degree, because I kept pursuing understanding why is hardball strategy and destructive strategy used in international relations. And then throughout that process, I learned a lot about this group. If you look at a group of people, and the science was developing, this was in the 80s, the science was developing around a group called bystanders. Or maybe we look at groups and there's perpetrators of the coercive tactics. And then there's also groups who really want to collaborate. So I found that this was interesting because not all people in a group basically really believe in coercion and domination as the most successful tactic to use. So I went into the world of collaboration and social psychology, and I learned a lot about this concept called power with. And through that process, I understood that you could actually build a science and an art. There is a skill to collaboration and to institution building, to getting rights protections. And if you actually looked at the uh, bystanders, a big group of the bystanders just are neither perpetrators or collaborators. They just are unconscious of what to do with their behavior. So I found that if you can begin to educate bystanders and encourage bystanders to get more of what they need, that basically understanding how the other words are social psychology, how people do really want to invest in relationship building and building prosperity for their communities, their families, not only for themselves, but also for their countries. Understanding that whole science and the fact that we could build communities through bystanders and those who want to collaborate. The coercion, the manipulation is a relatively small group of people. So that completely changed my life in terms of how I was going to look at studying power and using power.
So if I kind of play back what I'm hearing here, so the bystanders are standing there, and sometimes because they're not saying anything, they're giving implicit approval to the
Right.
coercive. But I think what you're saying is if you're able to activate them in a different way, that you can enfranchise them in driving a more positive change. Did I get that right? Or
Yes,
mm,
exactly.
mm.
Right. So could it be cultural? Could it be gender-based? Could it be national-based? Why is it that some of us with our social conditioning, our psychology will be more focused on what I call a more sociocentric self-interest, knowing
Mm.
that I do better if you do better. And we could talk for another hour just around the science around this. I just read a study recently that is it your social experience that creates a direction for your political opinion or political identity, or is it your political identity that does impact your social psychology, your sense of self-interest? And primarily, it's the science so far on that is that depending on your experience in social relationships, knowing how to build them, knowing how to maintain them, knowing exactly how to encourage others with a safe space, that can impact the way you look at your political behavior and
Mhm.
your work behavior and your organizational behavior.
Mm.
So it made me realize how important it is that when relationships matter, and this is most people I've ever talked to when I'm coaching or teaching around the world, most people will say there is really no monopoly where someone has more power than you.
Mhm. Mhm.
And yes, structurally, some have more authority than we do, but is it legitimate authority? So we're
Mm.
looking at how do you create power with one another so you can build resources and protect yourself and create a community of safety and abundance. So I discovered that a lot was missing.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. We've got Alex Searle on the line here, the CEO of Humble Minds, and he lives and breathes social communities, and I'm sure
Right.
that he's going to have some interesting perspectives when we open up for questions, Karen. So you've had this revelation, you've had this journey. You recognize that, when people hear the word power, they maybe default to the coercive types of power. How do we help people broaden their understanding of what you're calling here power with? Say a little bit more about that.
So power with means spending some attention on the nature of the relationship first. So I know a lot of grad students, a lot of executives don't really like this part of the negotiation preparation. However, the deepest, most successful part of a satisfying relationship and negotiation relationship is first of all knowing who you are. And in the context of that relationship, does the relationship matter to you? So there's some negotiations, for example, let's use negotiations as an example. If I'm on the trading floor and it's a transaction of a buyer and seller, necessarily the relationship may not matter. It's a transaction. You have to win above all else. You might want to get power over, have all the knowledge about the vulnerability of the other party, for example, if you're going to invest in something that has more potential. Transactional, you don't necessarily have to spend a lot of time on understanding that relationship. However, of all the most interesting, some of the interesting negotiations I've had with executives or grad students and myself is buying a car. And the industry, I have volumes of training materials from students and executives who have worked in the car industry, buying industry. Basically, they're all built on manipulation, coercion, domination, finding ways to find your vulnerabilities and then to actually lead you in that direction. However, there's many people, including us, we know that the relationship with the dealer becomes very important in terms of resale, in terms of buying a car for our son, in terms of the kind of work we get when something goes wrong, problem solving throughout the life of the car, that the relationship does matter. So we would look at it differently and try to change the game from their tactics or silly tactics to let's build a relationship. And if we can't do that, then we go somewhere where we can. And we've been successful with that. So it's a long answer for we need to know ourselves first. We need
Hmm.
to understand that my safety, my uh, abundance, my sense of satisfaction, my sense of service is in the context of a relationship. So when the negotiation begins, and that's why I spend so much time in the quantum negotiation method. How am I thinking? How am I feeling? How is my physical stamina today? What is it that I want to behave? How do I want to behave? And lastly, what is giving me meaning in this relationship and in this particular negotiation. And then to understand that the other party has all of these dimensions too. So part of our work in terms of reclaiming our own agency or our own power so we can get help from others to help us solve our problem is to spend time on the self and then define the nature of the relationship. Is it important to you? Then we're going to spend some time in a pre-negotiation, understanding what they need, and then be very forthcoming what we need, and then to co-create a solution that maybe neither one of you knew from the outset. And that's the whole world of what we call creating value. Before we claim value and cut the pie, we create value first, and then we claim our part of the pie.
To really being anchored in yourself, what you want, why you're here. And then I guess you're a little bit like a detective, right? Because you don't know all those other things about the person on the other side of the table.
Right.
But that you
Exactly.
start to explore by presumably what the questions you ask or how
Yes.
you open up the conversation and things like that.
The most powerful question in a pre-negotiation stage while we're creating value, before we claim value, is why. And I remind so many people I work with is put in on your notes way on the top, write down why, WHY, and behind it put the number 5. Because sometimes we forget, we're so caught up in our own story and our own needs and what we want, is we forget to ask why. And I find that why is the most powerful word in a negotiation for both ourselves and the other party.
So the
And
number 5 is because you have to ask why 5 times?
yes,
Yes, ma'am.
seems
Interesting.
ridiculous, but it works.
Yeah, I bet.
And you're even
So,
talking to yourself. Just why are you so attached to this number?
hmm.
Why are you getting kind of coercive with this proposal? Why is that?
So many follow-up questions. I want to invite our colleagues on the line to post questions in the chat. We'll be opening up the lines to interact at 1/2 So Karen's formal presentation, first 30 minutes. If we don't get to all the questions and you can't stay on, we promise that we will follow up with answers from Karen to your questions. But I do want to make sure that I reserve a little bit of time, Karen, to talk more about the Social Intelligence Lab, because you've got a 6-parter, not a 5-parter, a 6-parter, I believe, coming up that really embodies this practice community that we talked about at the top of the call. Tell us a little bit more, like if people show up to that, what are they going to see?
Well, first of all, I'd like to preface this with, I know from the experience of working with very smart, very educated, very practical, street smart negotiators, that practicing to negotiate power with or collaboration, especially with people who come only with a hardball strategy, is extremely difficult. You can plan for it, you get your nervous system ready, but if somebody hits you with a manipulation or a coercive tactic, it just screws up the whole nervous system. So what I found, just like in so many other fields, it's around the practice. It's like when you go to a defensive training class. I take a lot of especially my women students, to a defensive training class because it gives them that feeling. If somebody's coming at you with words or body language or even attack, that you have had practice knowing how to stay stable and to be able to go back to your base, go back to your foundation. That it's a practice. And most of us don't get physically attacked in a negotiation or in a problem-solving meeting. Many of us do get attacked verbally or viscerally, because there's a way to undermine someone's sense of security if you understand how Machiavelli, realist strategies work. So I have found that people need to do a lot of practice and in a
Hmm.
safe environment. And I'm so excited about what all of you are doing in terms of creating a practice community. I've learned so much from all of you in terms of what does that practice community mean and why is practice so important? And because we have a global interest in this, can we do this digitally? Can we do it in a virtual space? And last year, I did a grand experiment with Sharon Korpachu and with Shamshad Khan on applied improv for negotiators. And it does work virtually. We would all prefer to be in person, but because of the different geographic locations, it's tough. So I have found that when you have that experience, that practice with real time feedback, and you can actually feel what it's like to be surprised, but yet stabilize yourself, that I feel like most people can reclaim their sense of urgent or their agency, have my own power, have my own anchor. And what I'd really like to do is to have people join the lab so we can share our stories of how did you handle the attack in that meeting? Because a lot of people will observe it, like you said, a bystander, but they won't step up. What is our role as bystanders if we see attack, coercion, manipulation? Think about that for a moment. How can we practice this in a lab situation, get some immediate feedback, and then to take it outside, practice it, and bring it back into the lab so we can actually look at, there's so many interesting strategies people have for anchoring themselves when they've been attacked. Maybe I just have to give you one story of how I've used it. Uh, I was a faculty at Thunderbird School of Global Management, where this is where I met Sarah. I've met many of you here. And I was working with a new faculty member who came in and had enormous amount of authority on a certain topic. And it was a topic that I was really interested in terms of cultural studies. And I was asked to be the second in command of a new center. So I was working with this faculty and he told me to go to all of the faculty in our staff and to tell them all to start taking students to different countries and different companies around the world so they could learn more about the cultural ways to do business. So I had to tell him immediately that we have been doing this from the inception of this university. And we don't tell faculty to do this. They all have their own political and business contacts. They set it up, they propose the class, they take it around the world. So this went back and forth. He just kept insisting that I needed to tell them to do this. And I was showing him the things that people do. So this had gone on for a couple of weeks, and I went into his office and he had a round table. We always had to meet in his office. He had a round table in the office, and he was sitting to my right, and I was sitting to his left. And we had a table in front of us. And all of a sudden, he got really angry that I needed to be doing this. I needed to do my job. And he got really forceful and puffed up, which is, this is a Machiavelli realist strategy: puff up and push toward and overwhelm the nervous system of the other party. And I had a pen in my hand and I just set it on the table. And then I put my hands on my legs and then just try to connect with my nervous system. And I noticed that I was sitting up too. And then I leaned back in the chair and I didn't know what to say. I just said, this must be hard for you too.
What happened?
And he changed his tune.
Mm,
Never talked to me like that again.
mm,
But that's because I had done a lot of practice, because I knew when I would have meetings with him, I was going to get attacked.
mm.
So that's just an example. It seems so minor, so simple, but it changed the way I want to be treated, and it changed the way somebody else was treating me. So
Hmm.
I learned again over time that he did this to everybody. So
Mm.
that made me feel a
Mm.
little better.
And I suspect fewer people responded in this very anchored, centered way than as you did. So, Karen, your Law of Power series is starting on the 28th of March, and then
Yes,
there's going to be 6 weeks of this. So, tell us what people can do if they want to be a part of that.
absolutely. So we're going to take 6 laws of the Machiavelli realist power, and we are going to examine why that's so seductive and how it's used. And then we're going to talk about what is the antidote to this power over strategy. So what I'm going to do is post an article every Friday starting March 28th. This week I'm going to post my story for everybody, and then just get people interested in joining us on my LinkedIn and in the Humble Mind and also in the Social Intelligence Lab. So I'd like you to join with the conversations we are going to continue on each of these topics. There's a lot to stay on each of these. So for 6 weeks, every Friday it will be posted, and then we will have discussions all the next week in the Social Intelligence Lab and Humble Mind. So let me give you an example. And thank you, Alex, for working on these with me as well. Uh, this is one tactic that is used in Machiavelli strategy is starve others of your presence. Make them want you, make them want to see you, cancel your appointments with them and offer them something, and then keep your presence, keep your interaction with them very limited. The idea is that they're going to want you even more. And what we're going to look at is, why does engagement above all else actually create more opportunities and others wanting to help you solve your problem, as opposed to not telling them what you need? So that's an example.
Right.
Uh,
So it sounds like we're going to get here's what you might have experienced in a
yes,
power over strategy, and here's how you can counteract that with a power with approach.
yes. And we're going
Six,
to
six
have
of them.
assignments. People will get, anybody who's participating gets an assignment. Start
Excellent.
observing dirty tricks, right?
We
Can we
love
start
assignments.
to when you come to these articles and these discussions, everybody's going to get an assignment to observe when you see somebody starving you of their presence, and why are they using that tactic?
Hmm.
And then look at, how do you notice certain people in your life who really use engagement and you really want to help them. You want to help them solve their problem, create something new, or we feel better about sharing our limited resources with them. So it will be an idea, looking at the theme, having an assignment, and then we'll do some debriefing on how that practice happened, how it worked.
Nice. Wow. Sounds amazing. So, Karen, we got a few questions in the chat, and recognize we're at the half hour, folks, a little bit over. If you need to jump off, please do. Um, Question from Susanna here. She's wondering if it's possible to convert power over to power with in the event that your negotiation partner is very strict and sort of manipulative, so coercive. Do you have some good practices for that? Does quantum negotiation have some good practices for that?
Thank you, Susanna. I love that question. And again, this may not be exactly what we want to hear, but it comes back to our fundamental preparation. What is it that I need? And how do I want to behave? And everything we do in negotiation is always looking at, what alternative do I have to this outcome? What's my alternative to not working with that person, or taking that job, or having to buy that product? before we even begin the negotiation, we have a good sense, going back to our dimension on thinking, that I think in a more abundant way as opposed to a scarcity way when I go into that negotiation. Meaning, before I start working with that team, I know that I have alternatives to working with that team. That's just an example. I have an alternative. If this doesn't work out with this product, then I'm going to go to another supplier. If it doesn't work out with this car seller, I'm going to go to another. Before we even begin, we understand what is exactly we need, how we want to be treated, how I want to show up and behave, and then what is my alternative. The most Another powerful word. There's two powerful words in negotiation. One is why and the other is no. And I know, Susanna, you and I have talked about this a lot, that sometimes it seems like we don't have any alternative. They have all the monopoly, and they're always going to use manipulation because they have more authority. They have more structural legitimacy than we do. However, and all of you have examples of this, the more you stay committed to your own anchor, your own self, your own values, the way you want to show up, and what your spiritual values are, you will believe that there are abundant opportunities. And many of us have talked about the situation where you just have to work with somebody who's this, let's just use a term, a narcissist. You just have to work with that narcissist. The most important thing then is to know yourself. What is your value? What is the limited way that you can be transactional with that individual, and or go to your alternative, whatever that might be, in a friendship, in a relationship, in an organization, in a community. Does that help a little bit, Susanna? But because that is a tough one, because often we can't convert the power over because it's a habit. Partly it's a part of a neurological makeup. They don't have the capacity in the psychological makeup or even the neurological makeup. 1%, 2% of the population, completely sociopath. They don't have the biological function to be able to collaborate with others. For the most part, it's just habit. It's been rewarded, it's been reinforced, and then you tend to expect everybody's going to act like that. This is where the power with practice can surprise. And then, like Sarah said at the start, bystanders then just learn something new. Hey, there is another way. There is another way of doing this.
And Ben gave you a reinforcement, non-verbal, more
Thank you, Ben.
powerful than any verbal message in negotiations. You've nailed it, as always, Karen. What other questions do we have for Karen? Go ahead, Alex.
Hey, hey guys, lovely to see you both, and really, really good conversation. Really enjoying following and listening to it. Um, in your political kind of science work, Karen, I'm interested in what you have to say as a, and I know we've talked a little bit about this, but your kind of your antidote to the chaos of realism, and the kind of the Henry Kissinger realpolitik, you know, because it seems to be the order of the day, certainly in how conversations are had at that macro political level. The strong guys, you know, are the ones who defeat the weak guys, and that's just how it is. And you know, you've got to kind of just work with that order as the law of the universe, the law of the jungle. So, in your power with argument, what's the best kind of reply or antidote to that kind of argument, the law of the jungle argument, the fact that realism and the sort of the Henry Kissinger way of seeing the world is just how the big boys play, and if you don't like it, then you've got to get out of the kitchen. You know, is there a good kind of reply or riposte that can just destroy their position? I'm hoping there is.
Yes. Well, yes, we've talked about this a little bit. I love this question because one of the first lessons also I got in international relations was that nation states are not the same as just human beings living amongst others in communities, meaning that if we don't take the realpolitik and we don't take egoism as functional and rational in terms of peace and security, no one else will. People will say, well, yeah, the UN will enforce it. But there's not a real belief system that in the end, sovereignty rules above everything else. So that rule, I think that's debatable. That's why I studied institution building and globalism and how we can find these super organizations to help us manage peace and security. So there's always going to be this tension between political science, international relations is always functional and rational on the realpolitik because sovereignty is the only thing that matters. If you don't protect your sovereignty, someone else is going to invade, is going to take advantage of you. So you can see today, the words are all about your own nation's interest. Sovereignty rules above everything else. Don't make agreements with other countries because that weakens your own sovereignty. So just so we keep that in mind, that's always going to be a theme. However, we see though within all of the nations we're looking at, there's also this whole movement for institution building, cooperation, multi-track diplomacy, and that it's built on relationships. How can we trade better with each other? How can we have cultural exchanges, get to know each other better? In terms of how I look at it today, and sometimes, Sarah, I know you think I'm a little optimistic, but I know that the relationship building, the institution building, look at all of our cross nation exchanges with each other, all the communities that I'm seeing building, and something that I noticed from the conscious mind movement is that even in our marketing, even in our words with each other across the digital platform, we want to be conscious of we're building relationships and not coercing and manipulating each other. So because of all that, I believe that this is always going to be here. And there's always going to be a tension between collaboration and egoist self-interest. That's always going to be there. What I find powerful is we get to choose. We get to choose in terms of our own set of capability, our own potential, our own self-satisfaction, and the prosperity and the ability to gain relationships is going to impact what we choose. So go ahead, try the Machiavelli, try every trick in the book of manipulating, psychological warfare, deception, try them all and see how well that goes. I always tell people to experiment with these things. And let's observe what is happening with the Machiavelli realist, a return to the fundamental concept of sovereignty. And I still believe in the long cycles of history and the long cycles of where we're going to see, where people are going to put their time and their energy. And more importantly, what gets the visibility. So I really think that the media and social media and our news sources, journalism, that is one of the most important things to pay attention to today in terms of misinformation, lack of real facts, for all of us to stay focused on understanding there's a multiple perspective at work here. There's one that's really visible right now, really visible. That doesn't mean that the rest doesn't exist. So in terms of my belief structure, I think this is why we need to do this even more. I wrote this Laws of Power series back in like 2010, and I decided it's time to bring it back because it's so seductive. It's very seductive. Does that help at all, Alex? It's a long, winding answer. Thank you.
question, Karen, on a similar theme, but on a micro level, is I've been over the past year starting to dig more deeply into toxic cultures in organizations. And often we see one of the most senior, if not the most senior person in the organization who is demonstrating Machiavellian power over coercive tactics, often with victims, specific victims in mind. And bystanders stand by and don't step in, to your point earlier. What's your view on, do we help the victim anchor him or herself better, or do we work on the bystanders, or some combination of both? I think for me, it's hard to put more pressure on the victim, the bullied person who's often gaslit,
Right.
confidence shot, after what can be sometimes years of terrible abuse. What's your guidance for applying this in the toxic culture construct?
There's so much to say about that because we all know there's a legalistic strategy. We all know we can pursue that. Number one, that's important just so a victim knows that you do have rights protection. However, just standing by the side of a victim or hearing their story or helping them refine their anchor in terms of how they're thinking, how they're feeling. Oftentimes you may find that there's some trauma, that this experience is just a pattern that has happened for the victim. And some then real psychological help could be there. Therapeutics around trauma therapy, for example. And or just being at their side and helping them to practice. It's almost like a self-defense class. Practice speaking or practice moving or practice observing so it doesn't hit us so hard when it does happen. And then oftentimes others will see that they do have support, that you're supporting them and they value your reputation. So they might ask, and you can ask what they could do or say and to rally around. And I know I've seen that happen in many cases where oftentimes we just have to support each other and to allow that person to have voice and to see what kind of help they might need. And at a minimum, as bystanders, not to pour gasoline on this victim and cheer for the perpetrator. Right?
Yep.
And again, to look at the situation really, truly, is this a monopoly? Does this person have this much leverage over every aspect of your life? And it's not true.
Yeah, right.
And this is big part of what I learned about being powerless is I have more leverage than I think I do. And I used to go into every negotiation, like with Alice, let's say. I think I had like 10% leverage and she had 90%. But that's not true. I was a manager. I was there every day. I had great rapport with these waiters. My leverage was at least 50-50, maybe 80, and she was 20, if I would re-examine that situation. So part of going through a case like that, if you're treated like a victim or being completely manipulated, go back to your basics. Where is my leverage? I think abundantly. I behave in a cooperative way of others that can help me. I take care of my physical health. So when I am attacked, I am not feeling desperate. And spiritually, I know that I can find more meaning if I advocate for myself. And there is a higher force or meaning that is protecting me as I go through this, whether it's love of a relationship or a love of your teammates, that really increases the leverage. And if we're straitjacketed by a bully, we figure out we have more options.
Thank you. Let's do that. Anything, any other questions, thoughts, comments before we close?
Let me ask you, Sarah, what has had been your experience? Because you've worked in some really diverse, multicultural environments. Is there any one strategy you've used over time that helped you when you felt a little vulnerable in some situations, that helped you to be able to be so engaging? Because you have a great power and energy toward engagement. What is the deeper thing that you do that allows that to be part of your behavior?
Wow,
Thank you.
I didn't know I was going to be asked that. Uh, the one example comes to me is I was global VP for AstraZeneca, and Karen, as you know, based out of London, anywhere else that I went, people were just looking, oh, this guy is from London, be careful, don't say anything in front of him. Otherwise, it's going to go back to the CEO and all that. Long story short, my first visit to China is when I learned localized strategy. End of story. Because the country manager in China said after my presentation, of course, as to, well, Ben, that's, okay, strategy is coming from London, but China is a different market. It's not going to work, and so on. So I opened it up with a question. And that's what I wrote just now, taking initiative and being proactive. And I've got a story on that one as well. But I just asked, I said, not you, Mr. Country Manager, but let me ask the entire team. What do you think should be our approach? A, B, C, D, E? Karen, they were just telling me tactical approach to fulfill the strategy. And I said, you know what? Let's go with this.
Right?
This is your strategy, tactical approach, results. What's going to work in London is not going to work in China or
Right.
New York. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I've done that since then with every market and to influence any culture as well. And it works out great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's a perfect example of that
Great
whole
example.
negotiation before you start just banging away on your proposal.
Yep.
Thank you, Ben. Excellent. Thank you.
And that's, I think, the courage. You're obviously a courageous leader, Ben, but the courage to be able to do that and potentially face the music back in London. How did you manage that?
When you have the self-awareness that you're not doing anything incorrect or compromising as far as the integrity of the organization and or yourself, I think literally the courage just sprouts up like your plants right there in the background. I mean, you don't need to nurture as
Mhm.
every single time. And when I said taking initiative and or being proactive, this is a perfect time for me to share this. I won't make the story long, Karen, I promise you. Flight from Cincinnati to Boston. About 10 minutes into the flight, a guy in front of me rang the call bell. Here comes the coordinator of the flight. He says, hey, look, I forgot my winter jacket in the club room. Can you please call them and see that they can, the code, my jacket will be at the Boston airport in the next flight. Sure enough, this guy, flight attendant, went into the cockpit, made the call, did whatever he wanted to do, came back about 10 minutes later and said to him, sir, good news, your jacket is on the next flight. And yes, that's the good news. Here is where I'm going to ask you to do something. Go to the Logan Airport and pick it up tomorrow morning. And I don't know what happened, Karen. This guy lost it, the passenger. Passenger said, "How dare you ask me to go to the airport to pick up my jacket? You're going to deliver it to my office or my hotel." And it just went back and forth. Long story short, first time in my 7 million miles on different airlines, I saw first time flight attendant emotional and crying, because this guy was cursing. This guy was saying, "I'm going to write to your bosses," and so on. I walked up, went to the alley. I said, "Adam, before this guy's email reaches anyone at your airline, the CEO will have heard from me tonight. And what a wonderful thing you did for the guy. And there's always one that you can never please, no matter what you do."
Right.
This guy, Karen, still writes me every 6 months thanking me, Christmas cards, Diwali cards, and any festival, and he will still write to me. And that's what I mean by
Yeah.
I was a bystander. I didn't
Right.
have to do anything. To Suzanne's point, power
Yeah.
with comes from taking initiative and being proactive. Thank you.
Yeah, good example. It happens so often that we could stand up and be that bystander. Thank you. That's awesome. Sarah, you had something?
I think that's a great place to close, Karen. We're just coming up to the top of the hour, and I just want to thank you for your time, your insights, and can't wait till the Law of Power series starts.
All right. Thank you,
Assignments
Sarah.
and all. Thanks,
Yes.
everyone. Have a great rest of the day. We'll see
Thank
you
you,
soon.
everybody. This is
Bye now.
wonderful. Thank you.